Lesson 4. Was the Philippines prepared for Typhoon Haiyan? Disaster preparedness is taken seriously in the Philippines, and it would be wrong to think that as a lower income country it is unable to take mitigation measures. The Philippines have much experience of typhoon impact, being the first Pacific landmass in the typhoon track. For decades, risk reduction and resilience have been practiced, such as the publication of risk maps and providing evacuation shelters. On November the 6th, PAGASA, Philippines Atmospheric, Geophysical and Astronomical Services Administration, issued a low-level public storm warning, but within 24 hours this was raised to the highest level, indicating expected winds in excess of 115 miles an hour. When Haiyan made first landfall, the International Charter of Space and Major Disasters was activated. This allows relief agencies in times of disasters to have access to satellite data from space agency to help relief and recovery. The military deployed planes and helicopters in advance to areas expected to be worst hit. Community buildings, such as convention centres, were designated as storm shelters, but there was concern that they wouldn't be resistant to the wind. There were evacuation of whole islands such as Tulang Diot. All 1,000 residents left ahead of Haiyan as a result of years of community preparedness and education which had raised awareness. The local mayor won an award in 2011 for community work based on the Perok system. What were the effects of Typhoon Haiyan? The worst hit region was the low-lying eastern Visayas, with the flooding up to 1 kilometre inland. Whilst the initial death toll was estimated to be 10,000 people, the final count was 6,021. All buildings not made of concrete were destroyed. The main evacuation centre in Tacloban City Convention Centre became a death trap because the storm surge entered the hall where people were sheltering. There was no clean water, electricity or food. The mobile phone network was lost, and a lack of news from survivors exacerbated the stress. Vehicles overturned, and with no fuel available, transport was difficult. A storm surge of 5.2 metres destroyed the terminal building at Tacloban Airport and washed large ships ashore. Being a nation of so many small islands, the fishing industry was badly hit. In places, 95% of boats and equipment were lost to the storm surge. Farming is the other major livelihood in Panay. Thousands of coconut trees and paddy fields were destroyed, leaving 10,000 families without income. What were the responses to Typhoon Haiyan? The immediate response was from survivors who searched flattened settlements for bodies. The government response at all scales was criticised for being slow, and people turned to looting to find food supplies. Although the roads were damaged, debris on them meant that the rescue was slow. The airport and harbours were closed, so emergency teams had to travel slowly on foot, hampering aid distribution. International charities sent emergency supplies centred on Tacloban Airport. The UK and the United States sent diggers, Land Rovers and heavy lifting gear to clear the ground, and helicopters for aerial surveys of the extent of damage. The European Commission released $4 million in emergency funds, and the UK Rapid Response Facility provided $8 million in aid. 12 FRRC, International Federation of the Red Cross, emergency response units worldwide were deployed. The country faced particular problems because a month earlier, in October 2013, the country experienced its deadliest earthquake, 7.2 on the Richter scale, for 23 years at Bohol, killing 5,000 people. In 2012, Typhoon Bopa had ravaged parts of the southern Philippines and left at least 1,000 people dead. These two natural disasters meant that as a nation, resilience was low, as well as resources, financial, material and human, were stretched. A week on, survivors relied on friends and neighbours, all in the same predicament. Electricity was still absent, as were communications. People were desperate for food and medical supplies. A Red Cross convoy was ambushed as violence broke out as security broke down. Mass burials occurred in order to contain the disease. However, aid piled up at Tacloban Airport, with only 1/5 getting through to evacuation centres, such as the Astrodome. Meanwhile, there were queues of people at Tacloban Airport trying to leave. It was not all negative. Street sellers began setting up food stalls again, operating an informal economy. Displaced fishermen salvaged items such as fridges and coconut trunks to make boats so they could start earning again, despite the destruction of markets and fuel supplies. A major development seen in the disaster recovery in recent years is the role of social media. Portable broadband antennas were constructed, and micromappers.com were able to send relief workers details of situations outside the cities, using data collated by a global set of volunteers using tagged tweets that were classified into images, requests, or offers for help. Maps were kept up to date using OpenStreetMap. In the first 4 days, there were 770,000 edits of the map of the affected areas. The long-term responses included rebuilding homes and recovering the lost livelihoods are the two most critical issues. The Build Back Safer campaign will probably take 3 to 4 years, especially for remote areas that suffered more wind damage than floods. A heartening feature was a lack of disease outbreaks despite the loss of sanitation. A major part of preparedness by the Red Cross was the message of good hygiene and clean water, which was a priority in the immediate response plan. Continuing health programs focused on community-based disease prevention and epidemic preparedness, along with psychological well-being of survivors as a priority. 21,000 families were still in 380 evacuation centres 2 months later, waiting to be rehoused into new bunk houses to be built by the government. Debt is a major obstacle for the Philippine government in their efforts to become more resilient. The Philippines have been excluded from international debt relief schemes as the annual per capita income is regarded as being too high. 16 million Filipinos are expected to be in extreme poverty, but the country is locked in a debt cycle with more than 20% of government revenue spent on foreign debt payments, more than the combined sum on health and education. What is the future for disaster response? As the population in Southeast Asia grows rapidly with associated development, economic and social costs of frequent natural hazards are becoming out of control. The UNISDR is working with the global insurance industry to develop a new way of providing funds in the wake of a disaster. For the first tune in 2014, payments to local authorities will be authorized once particular natural triggers have been met, such as wind speed or rainfall. This could enable a faster and more focused response, and areas that have disaster reduction strategies will be rewarded. The risk of climate change is driving much work on adaptation and mitigation strategies. WWT and the Bank of the Philippines have worked together since 2011 to produce future scenarios based on climate data, socio-economic vulnerability, and adaptive capacity. One long-term recommendation is to move local infrastructure, such as coastal roads and communities, to higher ground, as well as investing in re-establishing mangroves along the coast. There is opposition to the government's no-build, no-dwell zone policy along much of the coastline of the eastern Visayas. Locals object to removal of their livelihoods, especially those based on fishing, and suspect that the government has accepted transnational corporations' money in return for planning permission, which locals perceive as land grabbing. The growth in social media offers great potential in disaster relief. The next stage is for the UNOCHA, the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, to develop a humanitarian exchange language open source software that allows relief agencies to exchange data, because at present the many different systems are incompatible. This would help build resilient communities in the future by analyzing data for vulnerable locations and building. Above all, It is recognised that community-level involvement pre- and post-disaster is very effective. Identifying all stakeholders and plans linking relief, recovery and development are vital in coordinating disaster management as well as creating accountability.